All right, to show you that we actually follow our own suggestions, Scott told us, one of the ways to get better design is to read the material design manifesto. So I kind of started in that, and I'm going to share with Eva what I've picked up on this so far.
So did you
So
design this?
I did. I started thinking about design a lot. So I went Launchpad. I found me a really cool rocket. You drop it into Google Slides, and they actually will pick up the coloring from it, which was interesting.
Nice.
Yeah. So, what I did was I headed over to Material Designs. And if you go to there is material.io, and then you click on the design part, and then that pulls up kind of their manifesto over here. And this covers all the different areas. So if you look down the side, Eva, they've got layout, navigation, color, type, all of it. Everything you have to think about and they think you should think about when you're doing design.
Well, I love that they've got it segmented out like that. I mean, it's such a daunting topic anyway. So if it's all clustered together, I don't even know where to begin. But if I already know I'm hunting down a solution for a particular aspect, this is great.
And the other thing you realize as you start reading through the components, which is over here, they have strong opinions about how you should use the different components and what kind of interactions people expect from them. And we'll get into all of that, but I thought we would start with an overview since that's, these are the major elements over here.
Okay.
And the first one that I took a look at was layout. And, and we'll go back to my slideshow here, because what I did was I just try to pick up the major points. Now, if you did this yourself, you might find other things that were interesting because they sure covered a lot of ground here. But, the thing I kept hearing Scott say over and over is, what problem are they solving, right? Mm-hmm. And so with the overall thing, the three major problems that they're tackling is they want it to be predictable for the user so the user knows they can tap here, swipe here, do something. How do you interact with this phone or this tablet? Consistent, so the person knows what they're getting into, and then responsive so that you feel like, when you're doing something, it's doing what you want it to do.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, the first new word that I ran into was gutter. And, I've got some gutters on my house, but I had no idea what they were talking about. And so a big part of mastering anything is learning what the lingo is. Now, do you know what design gutters are, Eva?
Okay, the only other gutter I can think about is like at the bowling lane.
Yes, absolutely. For you don't want your ball to hit the gutter.
Yeah, it keeps them
And so they think of your basic layout using a grid, which,
okay.
If you've used, what is the one on the web that everyone uses? That's the big layout for CSS. Do you remember? Bootstrap.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've heard of Bootstrap.
If you build websites, a lot of people use Bootstrap, and they have kind of a grid, a responsive grid. And what that does is that as the screens get smaller or bigger, it allows things to stretch out and fill that screen or wrap underneath each other as they go. And so they start with this grid, and they point out there's three major parts. There's the columns here that are in pink. There's the gutters, which is the space in between columns. Mm-hmm. And then the margin is the space between all of the layout and the edge of the screen.
And is it just the side edges, or is it top and bottom edges too?
It's just the side edges. And I guess with the phone, you tend to have a little app bar at the top or something that kind of gives you some space. And so they mainly deal with this. And what they talk about is as the screen gets a little bigger or a little smaller, they have guidelines around, do they squeeze the gutter in, or do they squeeze the margins in, or spread the margin out to try to fit everything on the page really nicely.
Now, I've played a little bit with, is Material the one that's sponsored through Google?
Material is a Google open source project, yes.
So, I've been playing around with some of the Google scripting, and so I have, I have that first layer of I'm playing with it, but I don't understand it yet.
Right.
And they have the expand and shrink as you're in the design thing to kind of give you a clue, and it changes depending if your phone or if you're a pad or like a tablet or a desktop, right?
Absolutely. And so, they're trying to just basically recognize that reality that we all have all these different devices with different screen sizes. And this was sort of a problem with web, because you'd have laptops and desktops. And I remember us having to design around that, but boy, it's gotten a lot more complicated with all these mobile devices.
I'm laughing because the hardest one we faced was WebTV.
Yes, we spent months designing the dating site for WebTV,
Oh
which
my
ended
God.
up, the product flopped horribly because the UI was just terrible. But yeah, it was awful trying to design for the television. Now, the next strange word that I kept seeing everywhere was this DP, and they pronounce it dip or dips.
Okay.
And so what this has to do with, with the original web, you would lay things out with a pixel. So you say, I want it to be 50 pixels by 30 pixels. Well, the problem is that screens have different pixel densities.
Oh.
So you've got, really dense, rich pixels on your expensive products, and then you've got your cheaper phones that don't have as many pixels per square inch.
Density independent pixel.
Dips, absolutely. And so this is a term that they use to try to, translate between the number of pixels and the actual space that it takes up on the screen. Now, the guides that they talked about was, what I liked about it is they have a lot of examples in here of do it this way, but also don't do this. And so as you're reading through it, you can kind of get the collective wisdom of how not to do it. And so, one of the don'ts I ran across was don't make really wide gutters because it's hard, it spaces everything out, and it makes your content have enough room.
Oh.
Now, the next thing was breakpoints.
Oh, sorry. That was a really insightful, But what I was thinking about is that, there is nothing more accelerating than learning other people's don'ts and pitfalls.
Absolutely. I'd actually rather get that than the do's, because the don'ts are where someone experienced a lot of pain. And I'd like to avoid that pain if at all possible. So the next thing they talked about that was interesting or kind of new to me coming from web to mobile was breakpoints. And what this is they have certain areas where they go, all right, at this screen size, we're going to radically change, or you could radically change how everything's going to be laid out.
So is that like where, I'll see a website on my desktop and it's side to side, but if I look at it on my phone, it flows vertically instead?
Absolutely. And so they have a whole list of breakpoints based on the common screen sizes that you can then use to go, all right, how do I want to leave the menu down the side, or on a phone that's going to take up too much space? Where am I going to put that information?
Okay.
Now, the next word that I had not heard coming from the web was key lines. And so you've got this grid, but then sometimes you just want to lay something out in a line. Like, here they're showing that side navigation, or the sidebar there where you can click on the faces. And that's not tied to the grid. It's just a key line that goes at a certain place, and everything on that key line lines up to the same place.
So, but can you go back for a second?
Sure.
So they're independent.
Yes.
But they also could be interactive.
Yeah, I mean, yes, based on the screen size, you could put the key line a certain place, but it gives you another way to line things up within your app.
So my mind is so trying to make meaning of this. Like this could be, the author's picture to the left, and then to the right is the title or subtitle, and then
if you look at it, that hamburger menu right here, which is on a lot of phones, and I've just learned that word too.
That's a new word for me.
Yeah, so it kind of looks like a hamburger. I never really understood what they meant by it, but it's like, the bread and the meat. And then you click it, and it will show some navigation down the left side.
Oh, yeah. And then there's the arrow that you could hit the arrow and then expand it out, but have a Okay, I'm with you now.
And so you line it up on this thing called a key line because it's sort of independent of all this other content here.
Okay.
Now, the other thing is that a lot of times you may not know the exact size like an image is going to end up, but you do want it to maintain the same ratio so it doesn't get stretched out funky up or down. And so they gave out these as the recommended aspect ratios to use for your images and that sort of thing to keep them looking correctly on the different screen sizes.
Okay.
And again, they talk a lot, and there are a lot of examples of how you handle screen sizes. And so, if you go through there and it gives you a bunch of rules of thumb on how to lay out your content to manage it. So like right here, smaller phone, they stack it.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you've got a bigger screen, it might look better, if you put A here, B, and then stack C underneath.
This is great because, you walked me through Flutter, and one of the next steps is to look at how do we begin to wireframe out what it might look like if we build something on it. So
Yep.
this would give us the guidelines for how to do the mock-up for both mobile and desktop.
Absolutely. Completely different screen size. And my ultimate fun thing would be if we came up with an app that was Apple Watch, mobile, desktop, and then finally the TV. Like, could we do the trifecta or the five, whatever the five, like climbing all the tall mountains on a continent.
At least you didn't put like the car monitors in there. So like really, do they have recommendations for watches? Like
yes.
The sizing?
Well, I think they do, absolutely, because they're covering all these different sizes, but the watch is, just completely different, right? The UI on it.
Okay.
And I'm guessing Apple has a really good design spec for that we could go take a look at.
Well, you know what I love about the screen before, where it's got the layout? So
yes.
I'm looking at this and going through the process of, okay, I'm going to mock up a product, start with like the basic bare bones. But I look at how it's color coded. It actually, having this guideline to begin with tells me how to articulate the design so that when it gets handed off to the person who's going to implement it, they don't have to guess at like the meaning. And it says this amount of code goes in A to express A, and B has its own code to express B. And here's how it's expressed depending on the endpoint, right?
Well, and that's what I love about Flutter is everything's a widget. So you're literally designing the A widget, the B widget, the C widget, and they can change how they look depending on the screen size that they're in.
Okay, you said widget and my shoulders just relaxed.
Absolutely. It's better than, because otherwise all the code gets crammed in one thing and then, oh my gosh, how am I going to lay it out or how am I going to do something with it?
Okay.
Now, density can help or hurt. So they had a really big section around, how tightly together do you want to put everything on the screen? If it's denser, yes, you can see more and there's more information, but sometimes it makes it confusing. And so they have this whole concept of increasing density or decreasing density depending on the application. They've got a lot of examples at the website kind of showing you what looks good and what doesn't look good.
Okay. And the don't use too big of gutters pointed to this too.
Absolutely. And so what they've got is they built into Flutter. Now this is experimental or not final version, but they have a density scale. And that density scale will make something squish in or squish out. Like with text, it would be how close each letter would go to each other, but or in the form, how close the form elements would be to each other.
Okay.
And that's really it. That was what I learned reading through their layout guidelines. Clearly, if you see here, like, if we go to spacing behavior, there's a whole lot more there, but I would just suggest, each person that's trying to get into designing a product, especially if it's going to be an app, going through this and reading it and starting to get an idea of, what should they be thinking about as they're pulling this together.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at this, and each of these things has in it, like embedded you can just feel it, the years of knowledge,
Yes.
and that, like, if I read this and then put together a mock-up or a wireframe, and then I hand it to, somebody I find on Upwork or another consultant,
A professional designer. Yes.
then this is actually having us on the same language plane.
Absolutely.
And if I'm saying I want something that's not as possible, we can point to the same framework and then understand from there. And that's going to shortcut so many frustrating conversations, because the communication has a baseline.
Because otherwise you're saying, I don't like how this looks, versus, hey, I think the gutters are a little too far apart on that. Could you tighten it up to make the product look better? I want it a little more denser so that it fits on the screen. It gives you that language to talk with each other.
Yeah, this is great.
Well, that's it. I mean, next time we'll cover navigation,
Okay.
which is, again, its own universe, but we'll just go through these one topic at a time, share with each other, and hopefully you in the audience will learn something and get inspired to dig in here and figure out how to build that next great app.
Well, thank you. I'm going back to my shoulders feel not as tense thinking about doing this, because it's streamlined. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, the great thing about constraints is it gives you freedom, right? It frees you up from all the dumb decisions you don't have to make. And that's what this is all about.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one.
Oh, if you have any questions about layout that wasn't addressed in this, drop it in the comments. And
Absolutely.
if there's a theme that arises, we'll make sure that we address that too.
Yeah, this channel's for you, not us. Thanks a lot, guys.